Good morning, everyone. 9 o'clock on the Lord's Day, time to begin our studies. We're going to be studying the life and works of King Hezekiah today. If you want to open up to 2 Kings, we'll be flipping between 2 Kings, starting in around chapter 18 and 2 Chronicles. You made it through the divided kingdom. Appreciate Randy's good work teaching last quarter. It gets a little easier from here, right? Because unfortunately for Israel, there's no storyline to follow in the northern 10 tribes, and so there's just a single storyline of the people of God in Judah, now that it's Judah alone. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get going into our class. All right, so as I mentioned, we are in a new time period. We're in the period of Judah alone. And does anybody not have a hard copy of the lesson that wanted one? I did print a few on Wednesday night. I don't know that got announced. But if you'd like a hard copy of today's lesson, I don't see any hands. As of now, I'm actually a week ahead, so I have lesson 2 also printed in the back. So if you'd like one of those before you leave, you can grab one. Don't get used to that. I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay 2 weeks ahead, but I'm going to try. So if I do fall behind like I often do, we'll be emailing those out and trying to get hard copies by Wednesday night. We're in this period now of Judah alone, and that in terms of the 17 time periods, does anybody know what number that is? Judah alone is number 11. So in terms of our timeline of Bible history, sometimes, as you go through the Old Testament, there's a lot, right? And in terms of where I am in my Bible, there's still a lot more on the right than there is on the left when I'm in 2 Kings. And I might not realize and feel the fact that I'm progressing rapidly toward the end of the story, the culmination. In fact, when I think back to my childhood and the studies we did kind of haphazard, which I think is maybe typical of many churches, maybe not studying straight through like we've been doing these last few years. I had a hard time understanding how anything in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles connected to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so these next couple quarters, we're going to get that gap filled in, which obviously we've been reciting our 17 time periods, and we know what to expect, but it's just such a good thing, I think, to have that complete story and see that, okay, the preparation of a people, this nation of Israel, now just reduced to the tribe of Judah and whoever else is there with them, is intended to produce the Christ, right? Going back to those 3 major promises to Abraham, way back in Genesis chapter 12, he's fulfilled 2 of them. He's made them into a great nation in Egypt. He gave them the land in the days of Joshua. And now the only remaining promise is there's going to be a seed that blesses all the nations coming from them. And so that's what we're anticipating as we get into these latter periods of the Old Testament. When we talk about Judah alone, I'll pull in some maps from time to time. I thought this map was quite striking. When we talk about Judah alone, this is the Assyrian Empire, and I guess at its peak, after they looks like also conquered Egypt. In this part of our story today, they hadn't conquered Egypt yet, but you can see how they dominated the entire fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, right? The land between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, all the way down over into what we call the Holy Land. And so you can see just tiny Judah as an independent nation throughout the period of the Assyrian Empire. Shocking, right? Just that map tells me something about God, that God is able to preserve his people when he wants to. And he, we will run across this word, the remnant. It's very much a remnant on this map, right? There's just a shred, a piece of a garment left of God's people, centered mostly just around the fortified city of Jerusalem, where you would think, how could mighty Assyria struggle to take this one little piece of land? What would prevent them? And we see in today's story the obvious reason why, that the one who's with Judah is mightier than the one who is with Sennacherib. God is more powerful than any nation, and he can keep his people free. But we know that later on he's going to allow them to go into captivity, and yet he can still preserve that seed of his people, that remnant, and the remnant will return to the land, as we know. We'll study that period as well. There's a little bit more detailed map here of just the region of the Promised Land. And you can see Judah alone is in reference to who? Who's gone now? Israel. It doesn't mean they're completely alone. They're still surrounded by these other nations, some of which have been conquered by Assyria, but you still have somewhat free people in Moab, in Ammon, in Edom at this time when we're studying, and they're going to then, as you see by that later map, eventually be swallowed up as well. And you see some of those condemnation prophecies in Isaiah, even in Jeremiah, talking about these nations that are going to be punished. God hasn't forgotten about them. He's seen their wickedness, and they are going to be punished, sometimes by Assyria, sometimes maybe later by Babylon or by Judah itself. But you can see over on the coast, what nations have already been swallowed up? Who do you expect to be over? Let's start at the top. You've got Phoenicia, right? That's Tyre and Sidon. They've gone to those nations in the past. Was it Elijah or Elisha that goes to the Sidonian Elisha, right? And so, that's part of Assyria now. Of course, Galilee and Samaria, which we studied last week, which Samaria finally falls to Sennacherib. And then down at the bottom on the lower coast, this region we hear a lot about in the news today, they talk about it as Gaza, right? But that's the land of the Philistines. So the Philistines have been consumed as well. In the story where Sennacherib comes up against Hezekiah to taunt him and to besiege Jerusalem, he sends his envoys to speak to the people in Jerusalem, but he is back in another city. Did you notice what city Sennacherib was in when he sent his envoys? And I'd run across this in the story a couple of times and didn't pay much attention because it's 2 Kings 18 verse 14. He's at Lachish. And I've just read past that a few times and thought, okay, Lachish must be someplace up there by Nineveh or something. No, he's talking about one of these towns of Judah. Lachish is right here. You got Lachish and Libnah, which are both mentioned as the place where Sennacherib was. So you can see how his armies have come down the coast. They've conquered the Philistines. They've conquered Gaza, you might say. And now they're looking to come inland and take Jerusalem. And so he's at Lachish. And there's a fascinating proof of these events. Of course, there's lots of Assyrian records from the excavation of Nineveh that tell all about these events. But if I'm going to, I put it at the end of my presentation, so I just want to skip to this. You can go to Lachish today and see the siege ramp of Sennacherib, which is fascinating because that's exactly how it's described in 2 Chronicles. In 2 Chronicles 32. 2 Chronicles 32:9. After this, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, sent his servants to Jerusalem while he was besieging Lachish with all his forces with him. So he's busy besieging Lachish. Now this picture, I was a little disappointed by it as I started researching this. It's like, okay, that's the siege ramp. Well, you can tell when you're digging through a city to see these different layers of history. You can tell the difference between the mountain that was there and the walls that were built as the city and these types of ramps that were built. The siege ramp was built so that they could bring their battlements right up over the wall. And there is a nice aerial view of, well, it's not super nice, it's grainy. But this was the best aerial view I could find of Lachish and how you can, if it hadn't been labeled by someone else, I would not have seen it. But that siege ramp is over on the right-hand side. And there's actually even a counter ramp that is there that shows that the people of Lachish were building their own ramp up to the same spot on the wall so they could counter the attack. But it's just, it's disappointing that there's not better information on the internet, but people can go and see these things as evidence of history that these things have certainly taken place. Fascinating to me. So let's get into our Hezekiah lesson and talk about some of these questions. Next week will be a little bit simpler lesson, only 2 chapters that we'll cover next week with Manasseh and Ammon. So if we go over a little bit this week into next week, that's okay. But as you think ahead, we're gonna also, just like last quarter, study a few of the prophets along with the historical text. And one of those is Jeremiah. Jeremiah has 52 chapters, and that's going to be hard. We're going to have only 1 week on Jeremiah. So if you want to know the book of Jeremiah, and you do, you might think about getting ahead. Maybe, 10 chapters a week over the next few weeks, so that you can get a chance to read through that book. That's what I'll be doing. All right. So question number 1 on your lesson today. What statements about King Hezekiah's goodness stand out to you? There's a lot of reading this week in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, but what did you see, Dad?
Well, it said that he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all David had done. So he was following the pattern of David, not a lot of these wicked kings that had been before him.
That's right.
Yeah.
David is the prototype of a faithful king, and pointing back to David is significant because there's a few other kings where the king would be compared to his own father. Did he do as good as his father? But he's pointed all the way back to David.
Yeah.
What else?
He didn't have a father that he could be proud of.
No, he did not. His father was Ahaz.
Right. He also trusted in the Lord God so that there was none like him before him or after him. I thought that was interesting to state. Even better, even greater than David himself.
I might think that David is being excluded since he has already been referenced.
Yeah, that's right.
Dad's reading from 2 Kings 18, if you wanted to follow along. 2 Kings 18, verse 5. But that's right. None before, none after. That's quite a statement. A very faithful king. What else did you find? Kiara?
I noticed in verse 6, this one really stuck out to me. It says in verse 6, for he clung to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but kept his commandments, which the Lord had commanded Moses. That really stuck out to me, and I thought it was a good pairing with verse 5 just before it, which is how devoted he was to the Lord. And you can obviously see that throughout his reign.
Yeah, what a picture there. Just imagine the terror that he might have felt seeing all the nations around him falling and knowing that they're on this island and they don't have much hope, right? But he's clinging to the Lord. If we're going to survive this, it's going to be because of the Lord. And he shows some great faith in God. Anything else that you guys wrote down? Yeah, Sam?
He was actually removing the high places as well, which seems pretty distinct.
Yeah, and that's why he gets compared all the way back to David, right? Because it wasn't just we're going to be faithful here in Jerusalem, it was, we're going to purge out the evil, the idolatry that others had introduced. Many kings, it said they served God faithfully, but they did not remove the high places. An action that was actually misunderstood by the Rabshakeh when he comes. He notices that Hezekiah had destroyed the high places, and he assumes that means that he's not even serious about worshiping Jehovah, because these were Jehovah's high places. Shows how a foreigner just doesn't understand the law of God or God's expectations. Anything else? Sam?
I guess, also looking at the bronze serpent that says that he
Yeah,
destroyed.
that's question 2.
Oh, sorry. I mean, I guess like that also stands out, just in the fact that, I guess we'll get into it, but.
No, it's okay. You need to pull me forward.
but someone who might be of weaker faith might, misconstrue that to think like, you're destroying something that the Lord instructed Moses to make, and therefore it has some sort of physical importance as well. So I think Hezekiah has his priorities straight, knowing we're not worshiping these things, we're worshiping the Lord, and this is contrary to what he would have us do.
Yeah. You could see maybe someone might rationalize, well, God told us to make this, so we shouldn't destroy it even if people are abusing it. But no, he had a lot of clarity there in seeing that needed to be destroyed. 2 Chronicles 31, if you want to flip over there, another incredible statement about Hezekiah summing up his life. 2 Chronicles 31, verse 20. It says, "Thus Hezekiah did throughout all Judah, and he did what was good, right, and true before the Lord his God. Every work which he began in the service of the house of God, in law and in commandment, seeking his God, he did with all his heart and prospered." Quite a statement. Good, right, and true. All right. And the second part of question 1, what reforms did he make? And this could be quite a long list. But what reforms really stand out? We'll talk about the temple worship here in just a moment. Dad?
Well, we already stated that he removed the high places, he
Mm-hmm.
broke down the pillars, cut down the Asherah, broke in pieces the bronze serpent, as we've already talked about, and let's see, I guess that's what I had.
What was the timing of this in relationship to Samaria's fall? When did Hezekiah get started with his reform? Did you notice?
While it was happening.
Did you say while it was happening?
Yeah, I'm just guessing.
Even before. So if you're in 2 Chronicles 29, verse 3, it tells us that he starts this in his first year. So as soon as he's put in at what age as king? 25 years old. In the first year of his reign, in the first month, he opens the doors of the house of the Lord. So he's eager to get this done right away. And it's later, it's back in 2 Kings 18, verse 9, that it tells us that it's Shalmaneser, king of Assyria at that time, who comes up against Samaria in the 4th year of Hezekiah. So he's already been doing these reforms for 4 years before Samaria is going to be attacked, and they're brought. So the 10 northern tribes are still there, and those 10 northern tribes are going to be carried away. It says in the 9th year of Hoshea, which is the 6th year of Hezekiah. So there's been 6 years of reforms in Judah. That shows you the impact that Hezekiah made. If wicked King Ahaz had lived 6 more years, then there's a good chance that Judah would have been gone with his sister to the north. But Hezekiah gets in and immediately starts reforms. And within 6 years, and it didn't take 6 years for him to get the temple back in order. they were rejoicing because of how quickly it was done. It was done in a month. And they were able to celebrate the Passover in the second month. And so all that's happening while the 10 northern tribes are still hanging on by a thread. At least maybe not all 10. They've been reduced down to Samaria and kind of its surrounding cities. But yes, Judah was making reforms, and Hezekiah makes a huge impact preserving Judah because he focused on the right thing. The only way to be to survive is to serve God faithfully. It wasn't necessarily get your army up, get your walls fortified. It was serve God faithfully. That was the priority. Did he do those other things?
Yeah.
So yeah, his reforms, spiritual reforms were first. But he also strengthens Judah with every ability that he had. Probably the most famous thing that he did to prepare for the eventual attack from Assyria was moving the water source. And so even in kind of the tagline at the end of his life where it says all the other acts that Hezekiah did, it'll mention the conduit on how he moved the water. So there used to be a spring that was just gushing out of the top of the mountain and rolling down the hill to the valley of Kidron outside the wall. And he thought, well, why should the king of Assyria have free water when he gets here? We're going to need that water in here because a siege is to starve you out and make you die of thirst. And so they close the cave. They, bust the opening to the cave so you can't get in. And then they tunnel from that water source into the city. And that's why you have the pool of Siloam that you'll even see in the New Testament mentioned. That pool of Siloam is accessing that water that would have been outside the city walls. And I think Waldron's material mentioned that tunnel they had to dig was like 1,700 feet long, tunneling through rock with just a pickaxe. So incredible work and very smart move to make sure they had water inside the city and could survive a siege for that much longer. So very wise king. So let's talk about Nehushtan a bit more. Question 2. Why did it have to be destroyed?
Because they were worshiping.
Yeah, this goes back to what? What was it made for?
Bronze thing. This is the bronze serpent that Moses made.
The bronze serpent. So which time period would that fall in?
No wonder.
Exodus,
A little after the Exodus.
wandering.
Wandering in the wilderness. Yeah, wandering in the wilderness. And the fiery serpents were coming among them because of their grumbling and complaining. And they're told to lift up this bronze serpent. Make the bronze serpent, and whoever looks upon the bronze serpent would be saved. A type of Christ that Jesus said, I'm like the serpent in the wilderness. And so now, here we are, hundreds of years later, they've hung on to it. I would. I don't think they would throw it away. It's a pretty neat relic of our history. But then they have begun to worship it. How can that be? What kind of warning should we take from that? I asked about things that God might give us for good that could become a stumbling block.
Well, people burn incense on it still. So,
Burn incense?
on the serpent of Moses, that's what he said that people still burn incense on it.
Okay. Right. But what about us today? Dad?
I thought about the passage you referenced in Matthew 5, where he's talking about if your eye offends you, pluck it out and cast it from you. If your hand offends you, cut it off and throw it away. And I guess that's indicating that if we're utilizing our good things that God has given us, our eyes, our hands, or whatever, our feet, to do evil things, then we need to get rid of those evil things. Not necessarily cut off your arm or whatever, but you need to straighten out your life.
Yeah. He continues by saying it's better to enter into heaven maimed than to enter into hell with all of your parts. right? Do we need this bronze serpent anymore? No, we don't. It's become a stumbling block. It was perfectly fine as long as we could control ourselves, but now that we can't control ourselves, then we're going to do without. No more relics in the museum. Randy?
So, what people do today is kind of what Shirley's talking about. You know, they worship inside their homes. They have little statues, little graven, little wooden images, or whatever the case might be, bronze images, and they worship them, things that man has created. Also, even nature itself. You know, people worship nature today. I mean, things that God has actually given us. God has given us the ability to make these things, or as far as the image and stuff, and then people begin to worship them. People worship animals, things that God has given us.
Sure. Isn't that a shame, Mom?
I thought of things like mental abilities, like somebody's really smart, and then they get to looking at themselves as being a god, even, you know,
Right.
what I think is more important, you know, so, you know, that or your wealth or your good looks, people, like, they're in the, you know, movies or whatever, you know, that people look up to, and that's just a gift from God to someone.
Yeah. It's a gift that, whatever we've been given, we use to the service of God, and yet then we can forget God and start using it just to advance ourselves and obviously stray from Him. Really good examples. What did you think about that, Sam?
And I think, I guess when you think more about like the actual keeping of relics and stuff, I think that the Catholic Church does it a whole lot. And I think from what I've looked at, it's not just relics of that have allegedly come from the Lord, but then they keep like blood and items of like previous popes and stuff. And then it becomes like, well, are you keeping these things to remember what the Lord has done for you? Or are you treating these items as holy as well? It seems like it might be a natural progression if you don't keep yourself in check to deteriorate into this way of thinking, like, oh, I'm holding on to this because it's important to me. This is a valuable item because of this power that it has or something, and then you got to constantly be checking why you're doing what you are doing. So
Yeah.
I think that's the case of this right here as well.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, just retaining those little, things that they think or they claim trace all the way back to Jesus, a piece of the cross, or this shroud that they say was, the one that wrapped Jesus, or maybe it was something of Paul or Peter. Yeah, those things may be interesting, and even if they were true, that's neat. But that has nothing to do with anything we should worship or ascribe any power to. Okay, well, let's talk about question 3. What work was required before Hezekiah could restart the temple worship?
People had to return to God,
Had to return, say it again?
people to worship and obey.
Okay, so that, like we mentioned, that was job number 1, getting the temple back open. Ahaz had closed up the worship of God, shut it down. If you remember, he brings an altar, builds an altar of the same design as the one in Damascus, and starts moves the worship onto this false altar, moves God's altar aside, and it actually says he closed the doors of the temple. So it all had to be restarted. Was there another hand?
Yeah.
Oh, Clarissa?
I mean, you'd have to then reorder the priests, and they'd have to be cleansed and purified, and he even obviously has to pull in together the Levites, which the priests we're going to talk about it, were farther off the mark than the Levites. So that's where those are the authorized from the beginning in regards to running the temple. So if you're going to reopen the temple and purify the temple, you have to purify the ones that will be in it doing the things.
Yeah, you couldn't just start the daily worship on day 1. There was a consecration that had to happen first. Now, what's consecration mean?
Purifying the priest and purifying the temple and purifying the articles that's in the temple.
Exactly. So it's purifying, it's making things holy again. So I asked you, what does that show us about God? I heard something. God is holy, right? God, just like he emphasized, especially with Nadab and Abihu, by those who come near to me, I must be regarded as holy, right? You couldn't just come to him however you want. If you're not consecrated, this text in 2 Chronicles 29 about the consecration of the priests reminded me of all the way back in Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, where Moses is doing this for the first time to get Aaron. They've finished the tabernacle, but then they've got to consecrate Aaron and Aaron's sons so that Moses can kind of hand off the work to this high priest who's going to actually go before the Lord and offer sacrifices for the people. So the people couldn't have their sins atoned for with these sacrifices until a holy priest could offer those sacrifices. And so, like Clarissa was getting to, we need to be consecrated. How should a Christian do likewise? Before I move on from question 4. How should a Christian do likewise? Is there a type and anti-type there, Dad?
I guess you could say we need to purify our minds, cleanse our hearts, get rid of whatever, evil thoughts or sinful ways, clutter our lives and purify ourselves spiritually.
It's a New Testament text over in 1 Peter, right, that says, you should be holy as I am holy. There is an expectation of holiness for the Christian. Some take a much more lax approach to worship, that there's no preparation, no planning involved in I'm going to go and worship God. God's attitude all the way through the Old Testament and even in the New is, am I not a great king? Would you set this before your governor? Right? That's the Malachi chapter 1 idea of they're not serving him very well. They're not treating him with respect. And so when we come to worship, we should show respect. Gil?
Sometimes you see signs on churches, they say, come as you are. And that can mean it in a couple different ways, but
Yeah.
maybe they say you don't have to change anything, just come as you are.
It's an interesting thought, right? And we sing just as I am, right? And so that concept is true in a sense, that we come to Jesus in a broken state that we cannot fix spiritually. And yes, we're so thankful that God provides the grace and salvation. But then should I disregard and the come as you are mindset of, I just got done mowing the yard all day and now I'm going to go worship God? Well, I wouldn't even go sit down at the dinner table without taking a shower first. And I'm going to treat my God that way when I'm filthy dirty. It's not all about just our physical appearance. I think that is an outward reflection of the heart. Do I care about my God enough to prepare myself in a respectful and orderly way? But what must be holy, like Dad was getting at, was the preparation of the heart. Am I pure? Do I disregard God all week long and then expect him to accept my worship on the Lord's day? Ready?
I like what they said in 2 Chronicles 29 verse 5 about how they consecrated and consecrated the temple. They use words like remove the filth, remove the rubbish, remove the defilement. And so that's really the kind of things as Christians, when we think about purifying ourselves and our minds, that's what we want to keep out of our minds. Filth, rubbish, things that defile our mind, keep our mind focused on the things of the Lord.
Absolutely. And Jesus emphasized it's what proceeds out of a man that defiles a man. So what's in your heart? What are you thinking about each day? Are we taking every thought captive? yeah, mine says they had to carry the uncleanness out. And they literally, for like a week, if I'm not wrong, were just carrying the rubbish out of the temple and throwing it in the Kidron Valley. There was so much garbage in there. We got to clean out the garbage. All right, so question 4. What detail of David's use of instruments in worship is revealed in 2 Chronicles 29:25? How does this fact aid us when answering those who want instrumental music in the church today? This little verse I've had underlined for a few years in my Bible because it's a gem. Shirley?
Well, the Levites, in the house of the Lord with cymbals and stringed instruments and harps, according to David the king and Nathan the prophet, as they did. For this is the commandment according to the Lord. So that's what.
Okay. Yes. So what part of that stands out? Is unique? Randy?
So the detail of the use of the instruments was specific, the type of instruments that was specific. And so, that's what stands out. It was actually commanded to use those, and so, I mean, that's what stands out, in comparison or contrast to today, if we're talking about someone who uses instrumental music. Where do they get their, I know I'm getting into the second part of the question, but where do they get their authority even to use the type of instruments that they're using? There's nothing said in the scripture or what David did. If they're trying to emulate the old law, then that's the things that they need to be using.
And that's true. Yeah. Anyone want to add something? The argument that's often made, well, first, the simple argument is, well, David used instruments, so we can too. Ignoring the fact that there were 2 covenants, right? First off. But secondly, they'll argue that David was an innovator. He came up with the idea and just did it. And you know, the reason I've got this one underlined, we're in the days of Hezekiah now. We're in 700 BC. David was back in 1000 BC. So 300 years later, we get this detail that, I'm sorry, it's not in the story of David. You go back and read the story of David in the Kings, in Samuel or Kings or Chronicles, and you don't get this detail, which I'm so thankful that the Holy Spirit provided, that it says the command was from the Lord through his prophets. This was not David's idea to add the harps and the trumpets and the cymbals. It was a command from the Lord. So, do you have a command from the Lord to do those things? We don't. We have a command to sing. Dad?
And it was also the Levites who had to do this.
Nobody,
it was very specific. So do we have any Levites today?
That's a good point. Yeah.
I don't think so.
A lot of specifics there. Exactly. Very specific authority. But yeah, we have it made very clear to us that it was commanded by God. So we should look for Bible authority for all that we do. Question 5. So how had the Levites demonstrated a better heart than the priests? And how did that impact the Passover? This distinction is made a few times through the story, that there was some Levites who had done better than the priests. Hezekiah had gathered them together and said, 2 Chronicles 29, verse 11, "Do not be negligent now, for the Lord has chosen you to stand before him, to minister to him, and to be his ministers and burn incense." Were they all responding? Did they all respond well to that admonition to not be negligent? And I apologize, I messed up the verse reference on this passage. I said verse 11 and verse 29. It's verse 11 and verse 34. So you might have been scratching your head on this one a bit. So in 2 Chronicles 29, verse 34, it says, "But the priests were too few, so that they were unable to skin all the burnt offerings. Therefore their brothers, the Levites, helped them until the work was completed and until the other priests had consecrated themselves. For the Levites were more conscientious to consecrate themselves than the priests." Did anybody have a different word in their version than where it says the Levites were more conscientious? Clarissa?
The ESV says, "For the Levites were more upright in heart than the priests and consecrated themselves."
Okay. Anyone else?
New
Gil?
King James says diligent.
Diligent. Okay, great. Yeah, it's all referring back to that original command to not be negligent. Get busy. Get to work. And since some people were able to get it done on time, that means everybody could have gotten it done on time. It was possible. And so there were some, and it mentions later in the story, there's some who they feel ashamed because they're not able to do it, that they're not ready. And so now instead of the priests of the household of Aaron, of course that's the priesthood that was supposed to be in charge of the daily sacrifices, they're not able to do it, so these non-Aaronic Levites are having to lend a hand. And they get it done, but it's because they had been more conscientious. What's the lesson that we should learn? We're God's royal priesthood, are we not? So what's the lesson for us?
God saves the upright in heart. That's what Psalm 7:10 says. My defense is of a God who saves the upright in heart.
God's looking at our hearts and wants to see that uprightness. And part of an upright heart is a heart that's diligent to do the work that's been defined for us. When we see an opportunity to do God's work, are we diligent to do it? Or do we put it off and maybe never get to it? That's those two descriptions, the one who puts it off and never gets to it, or the one who gets right on it and gets it done. That distinction God is seeing and calling one upright and one not upright. So we've got to be honest with ourselves. It's not just, well, I'm a procrastinator, or I don't do as much as that guy. Boy, that guy does everything really faithfully, I'm less faithful in my work. I need to do a little better. Well, God sees your heart. It's not just something to work on per se. It's something to correct, to be upright in heart as the one who does his work faithfully before God. Any other thoughts on that? All right, we're about to ring the buzzer. Question 6, what response did Judah get when they invited all of Israel to the Passover?
They laughed at him, they mocked.
Some humbled themselves.
Some did.
Some humbled themselves. And it was good for me to understand the timeline here. This is all before the fall of Samaria. So they had just consecrated the temple, and now they're going to celebrate the Passover in the second month, because they were still doing all the cleanup in the first month. And that was authorized, by the way. If you're not familiar, look back at Numbers chapter 9, where they asked Moses, what should a person do if they're unclean in the first month? And we can't celebrate the Passover. And he inquires of God, and they said, God tells him you can celebrate it in the second month. And so they're following God's law and celebrating it in the second month. But yeah, they go from Dan to Beersheba with this invitation, and so many of the people in these other lands, you can just see their hearts. Their hearts are wicked. It says they laughed them to scorn. Why would I go to the Passover? Why would I worship Jehovah? What has he ever done for me? These types of attitudes that completely misunderstand the God who is punishing them. But yeah, some humbled themselves and came. We'll pick up there with question 6 next week and move into the Manasseh and Ammon